Sure. I'm Mike Satz. I'm the state attorney for the 17th Judicial Circuit of Florida, Broward County.
My name is Michael Gregory, and I'm the Assistant Chief of Police in Fort Lauderdale.
Jeff Marano, I'm President of the Broward County PBA, representing 2,500 officers and deputies throughout Broward County. And I'm a retired police lieutenant from the city of Hollywood for 30 years. Woo!
Good evening, Democrats. Scott Israel, Sheriff of Broward County. We stand for keeping kids out of jail, reducing violent crime in Broward County, which we have 20% since I've been sheriff, and having true partnerships, meaningful partnerships with every community in Broward. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Good afternoon. My name is Gordon Weeks. I'm the Chief Assistant Public Defender for the Public Defender's Office. We're responsible for representing all the indigent in this community. Those folks that are charged with crimes that can't afford an attorney, our office represents them, and I'm proud to do that on a daily basis.
We have some significant problems in this country dealing with police. First of all, many people do not trust police officers anymore like they used to. Years ago, when I used to try a case, you almost had to put a police officer on, or else the jury would never believe their crime was committed. Now you have to be careful, because the perception in our community, not just based on what happens in our community, but what happens throughout the United States. For instance, Ferguson. People ask me and the sheriff, can Ferguson happen in Broward County? You bet it can happen in Broward County. That doesn't mean a police officer won't fire and be justified and kill somebody. That can happen, but what is the reaction to that? In Ferguson, I don't know about the validity of the shooting other than the grand jury felt it was justified and they gave out the grand jury testimony. But I can see what happened in the aftermath, that the people did not trust what happened. Most of the police department were white officers. I think they had two that were black, and most of the white officers didn't even live in Ferguson.
I saw a video like you all did from South Carolina. It was the most disturbing, degrading, repulsive video I've ever seen in my life, to see a former police officer gun down and murder a man in cold blood. Absolutely reprehensible. I saw what happens in Ferguson and other places like that, and all these men and women take 10 steps forward to take 8 steps back. And we can't allow that to happen. I can't allow that to happen as a sheriff, and you can't allow that to happen as our county that we serve. Ferguson. Can Ferguson happen here? Like Mike Satz said, yes, of course Ferguson could happen here. But ladies and gentlemen, I can stand here tonight as your sheriff and tell you, I truly believe from my heart that the aftermath of Ferguson, that rioting couldn't happen, because there's not a homeowner association, a club meeting, a democratic club meeting, a church, a temple, a mosque that I couldn't go into and bring the community together and give you this message. If after a shooting and after the investigation has taken hold, I believe, let me just finish, I believe we've done everything right. I'll stand here before TV, God, and country and tell you our deputies did everything right. But if we made mistakes and we did things wrong, I'll be the first law enforcement official who moved to take serious actions against that deputy. We are teaching, training, and always will. We don't shoot in Broward County as police officers at what we think. We shoot at what we see and what we know. And if we pull that trigger, we better be right, or I will hold those deputies accountable. Thank you.
Democrats, thank you for having this honest dialogue. It's very much needed. It should be had, and it's important that we have an honest conversation about race and law enforcement. It's not something we can put our heads in the sand and pretend that doesn't exist. I heard Mike Satz and I heard the sheriff talk about Ferguson, and they both acknowledged that Ferguson could happen here. But the question is why? Why could Ferguson happen here? Because we don't have the accountability for law enforcement misconduct, because there's a number of instances across this community where law enforcement officers are gunning down individuals, and there's no repercussions behind that. In Hollandale alone, in the last 5 years, there's been 8 officer-involved shootings. 8. 4 of those were deaths are involved. In Sunrise, there was a mentally ill gentleman that was gunned down by the police, even though his brother was on the phone calling 911, pleading with them to recognize that his brother was mentally ill. In Coconut Creek, a gentleman was tased 4 times and killed by uncertified officers using their taser inappropriately. We have it here. And don't forget Fort Lauderdale, where we all have seen and heard the racist texts, the offensive conduct that those officers were participating in. And what accountability do we have? You know, I applaud the sheriff for saying that he will stand before God, country, and this community and call those officers out. But what about the state attorney's office? What about their investigation? What about what they did? That is the issue. We have a strong sheriff, and we appreciate a strong sheriff that recognizes that children should have an opportunity at a second chance. That's important. But the sheriff is not the chief law enforcement officer. It is the state attorney, because they choose who they charge and who they don't. And when we don't have a state attorney that holds police officers actions accountable, they get themselves involved. We have a climate that is being created where officers feel as though they can use racist texts, that they can say that they're going to execute black people, that they say that they're going to hang them by nooses in their own conversation, because we've allowed that to happen. We have to be more aggressive, more progressive, and we have to hold officers accountable. We just can't continually let investigations go for years and years and years until we forget about it. We have to do it immediately, because the community needs to know that there's accountability for misconduct, whether it's officers or any other individual. I challenge everyone in this audience to come into the courthouse on any given day, walk into any courtroom, and you will see the vast majority of individuals in that courtroom are black males handcuffed to boxes.
I kind of resent what Gordon Weeks said, and I'll tell you why. The officers from Fort Lauderdale who made those racist comments and said those racist texts, how many in here think it's outrageous? You all do. There's nobody that has any kind of human conscience who wouldn't think that that is filth, it's outrageous, but you know what? It's not a crime. So when he says what the state attorney's office do about them, yeah, we're going to charge him as racist. Is that a crime? It's outrageous, but it's not a crime. And after you hear all these things about what happened in New York, and what happened in South Carolina, and what happened in Ferguson, and then you hear Fort Lauderdale officers making those comments, what do you think? It's terrible. And that is a reflection on every police officer and every prosecutor everywhere in this country who's trying to do the right thing.
Okay, so for those inside there was the question as to body cameras. Who would like to answer it? It's up to whomever would like to.
I am absolutely opposed to body cameras. I think it's going to compromise officer safety. If you look on the PBA website, there's a case that was an officer was just killed in Flagstaff, Arizona, where he had a body camera on, and he's playing to the camera. He had a threat. He didn't address the threat. He was being way too nice when he should not have been nice on the domestic. And the individual pulled the gun out of his jacket and shot the officer, I think 5 or 6 times, and killed him. Then he killed himself conveniently.
You know, it makes a statement when you have a law enforcement officer, the sheriff, recognize the importance of body cameras, but the union does not support body cameras. That speaks volumes. It creates a divide. It's us against them.
Yes.
You know, police officers are more concerned about that blue line that no one can cross other than police officers than the community. We know that we should have the actions of law enforcement when they're engaged in making arrests recorded. so that everyone can see what occurred and so that we can ensure that there's no misconduct. It helps the state, it helps the defense, and it helps protect the officer. And that's the importance of it. But when you have the unions getting involved and pushing forward their agenda and their interests, it compromises the community. And the example of the resentment from Mike Satz towards my previous comments is an example of the frustration that we have in the community. You know, when you speak to power and you explain to them that there is a distrust in the black community towards law enforcement, Mike Satz hears that differently. It was very evident by his visceral response to my making that statement. There are issues that need to be addressed. There's conversations that need to be had. But not only talk is cheap. We have to do some action and some real accountable action. And it needs to start with how do we address the misconduct? How do we get rid of the bad officers? Do we continue to let the investigation go on and on and on, or do we have some very clear judgment? But when a police officer, under the color of law, with their badge and their gun, make statements that they're going to execute black males and that they're going to look for nooses and hang them, that is a violation, and that is subject to investigation and further prosecution if they in fact did act on that. And that is what we did in the past.